Hey, I'm Kev Kermusker, and welcome to Power Oversteer. And in today's episode, we're reviewing the 17th round of the 2013 FIA Formula 1 World Championship, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix held at the Yas Marina circuit on Yas Island in the United Arab Emirates. And it was a very interesting race. There were lights, there was camera, there was not much action. Okay, it was actually a rather dull and poor race, quite the normal Abu Dhabi Grand Prix unfortunately, but it did raise some interesting talking points nonetheless, and there's some interesting strategy going on, especially for one stoppers or two stoppers trying to make that work. And so yeah, it was quite an interesting race, especially in the midfield. But again, it was a familiar story at the front and at the back. But to talk about this race, of course, we start with the race recap. So, the race recap of the 2013 Abu Dhabi Formula 1 Grand Prix. And let's talk about qualifying first. And the only guy under the 1 minute 40 mark was Mark Webber, nicking pole from Sebastian Vettel. Didn't quite get everything on his qualifying that. Then it was the two Mercedes with Rosberg ahead of Hamilton after Hamilton had a suspension failure at the rear of his car. He had a crazy spin near the end of the session. Kimi Raikkonen qualified 5th but was relegated to the back of the grid after failing a floor deflection test on his car post qualifying. The floor can only deflect, I believe, 5mm. Of course, it went over that mark. So Nico Hülkenberg was 5th with Romain Grosjean behind him. Then Felipe Massa, the first of the Ferraris, again in qualifying ahead of Sergio Perez, Daniel Ricciardo getting Q3, and Fernando Alonso promoted up into the top 10 despite just missing out on Q3 in the actual qualifying session by a 10.5, or actually 2 tenths. And then you have Paul di Resta as the leading Force India driver ahead of Jenson Button, John-Eric Vernon 13th, Pastor Maldonado and Valtteri Bottas in there. Improved Williams, they thought, from a hand in rise, but pace-wise still down there in 14th and 15th on the grid. 16th was Esteban Gutierrez. Adrian Sutil stuck in Q1, his Force India in 17th. And then 18th you had the first of the newer teams, Guido van der Garde ahead of Charles Pic and Max Chilton, and Jules Bianchi, who actually qualified in 20th, was only a 10th behind van der Garde of the newer teams, but had a unscheduled gearbox change, so dropped 5 places on the grid. And of course Raikkonen started last. But at the start of the race, what can we say about Mark Webber's starts? They're either brilliant or rubbish, and this was again rubbish for him. He dropped down to 3rd behind Nico Rosberg, and Lewis Hamilton also got a good start, but had to back out of a move on Webber into turn 1. Of course, Vettel got out into the lead. We also saw Massa run wide on the exit of turn 1, and Alonso got all the way up to 9th place, so good start from the Ferraris again. But further back we saw our only retirement of the race, surprisingly. Kimi Raikkonen starting last, got a bit of wheel spin at the start, and he made a bit of a dive into turn 1 when Guido van der Garde got too much curve, kind of lost the car over that, and then his right front of the car touched the rear left of Guido van der Garde's car, and it broke the track rod on the car, and he was out of the race on the first lap, and of course had a swift exit from the circuit thereafter. And then in the first stint, it was more about these two stoppers trying to build a gap to the one-stopping midfielders behind them, such as the Force Indias and Valtteri Bottas and the Williams. But guys did get caught up behind some of those two stop ones, or more prime tyre runners, should I say, in the first stint. So you had Esteban Gutierrez, for example, holding up Lewis Hamilton in his McLaren, allowing Nico Hülkenberg to be, stick to Hamilton like glue after Gutierrez went into the pits. But by the time we got to lap 20, it was kind of obvious that Force Indias were the team that was one stopping. Paul di Resta and Adrian Sutil stuck out there, and di Resta was 2nd behind Vettel at this point, with Sutil in 5th spot. Between them you had, actually in 6th spot, sorry. Between them you had Rosberg, Webber and Grosjean, and then you had Hamilton, Massa and Hulk behind Sutil, with Bottas in 10th. But it was Rosberg who was trying to make moves on di Resta on this lap, but in the end it was Webber who made a move on Rosberg down the back straight with some curves in his pocket, about half of the tank there, and then DRS, and he got around the outside of Rosberg to go up to third place in the race, but a provisional second spot overall. And then on 5 laps later, you saw the Suttil train with Hamilton, Massa, Hulkenberg and Alonso there, and Hamilton managed to DRS Suttil after being stuck behind him for quite a few laps, as I said, and then from 5th in turn 8, but Suttil managed to go back past Hamilton down that back straight. The straight line speed on these forced injuries was fantastic, and Massa went down the inside of Hamilton while he's getting distracted by Suttil on the outside into turn 11, and so Massa lost out on 2 spots there down the back straight. Then about 13 laps later, we saw Roman Grosjean pit for the second time. There was a speculation maybe hold out for one stop, but very early on, even before the race, Lotus knew they couldn't do a one stop, so they pitted Grosjean again, and he went on to the primes. After a few laps later from Mark Webber and Nico Rosberg, who took advantage of that clear air and of their new tyres to set fastest laps. So Grosjean came out behind them and just ahead of Massa on the pit exit. During this time also, we saw Nico Hulkenberg get a drive-through penalty for an unsafe release into the path of Sergio Perez, who kind of had the break with his McLaren, so yeah, he deserved it. And at the start, I forgot to mention that Jenson Button in the midfield, he hit the Resta in the first corner, kind of just locked all the wheels up and damaged his front ring, had to pit on the first lap again, and he was on the soft tyres and pitted around at lap 11 and did 44 laps on the primes till the end in his McLaren, and the car was standing very well it seemed, but just unfortunately he got caught on the first lap incident once again. And so after this, we saw back to the actual race recap. So after this, around 40 laps into the race, Massa decided to pit for prime tyres, for the harder tyres. And then on lap 45, Alonso pitted for the option, so split strategy from Ferrari, and it worked out for Alonso, getting that clear air, those laps in clear air, and getting the hammer down a bit. And Alonso came out alongside John-Eric Vergne, who was holding up Massa at this point. But on the pit exit, it's kind of a weird pit exit, because Vergne was going on the racing line, Alonso was up to speed on the outside, but there's no room, and so Alonso had to go wide, was flying over the curves or in the runoff, and managed to stay ahead of Vergne into turn 5. And also Massa almost got called out by Vergne braking hard, and so he had to go to the runoff as well to avoid making contact with the Toro Rosso driver, who was trying to make a one-stop work, but his tyres had gone off by this point, and he really dropped down the field, and that's eventually to 17th spot. Also, Valtteri Bottas was trying to do a one-stop, but he had to pit quite late in the race as well. And we also had Hamilton just ahead of Alonso at this point. But by the time we had got to lap 51, Vergne had already dropped outside of the top 10, and Alonso was right behind Hamilton and managed to DRS him down the outside before turn 11. Not Hamilton's favourite spot of the circuit, it seems, this race. Then on the next lap, Alonso DRS the Resta into turn 8, and Hamilton tried to get past the Resta, but in the end couldn't manage it as we went to the last lap, and Vettel had won from Webber by over 30 seconds, with Nico Rosberg just a few seconds behind Webber, and Grosjean right on Rosberg's tail in the end, but couldn't quite get close enough to make a move, just a second behind. And then there's a 33-second gap back to Fernando Alonso, and then 10-second gap back to Paul di Resta, who's just ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Felipe Massa was 8th, Sergio Perez in 9th, after making a last-ditch move on the last lap past Adrian Sutil for 9th spot, but the Force India driver still held on for a point. Again, Pastor Maldonado just missing out on points in his Williams for the second race in a row in 11th. Jenson Button in 12th, Esteban Gutierrez 13th. Then the lapped runners, starting with Nico Hulkenberg. After that penalty, his race just went to Mark, and so he was in 14th. Bottas in 15th, Ricciardo and Vergne 16th, 17th in the Toro Rossos. In the KTM, Guido van der Garde, one of his best races in F1, in 18th. Charles Pic 19th. Then the two timed at that. The cars that have been that 2 times, even. Jules Bianchi and then Max Chilton, and the only retirement was Kimi Raikkonen. So that is your race recap of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Let's go into the winners and losers now. So the winners and losers of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and let's start from back to front as I normally do this. So let's start with the Mauritius, the only cars lapped twice in the race in 20th and 21st. Bianchi ahead of Chilton, and they just both struggled with balance in the race after feeling quite well in qualifying, just didn't quite have the balance in the race. And the Caterhams ahead of them, 19th of 18th. Pick also struggled with balance in the middle stint, had to let Guido van der Garde through, who was much faster than him. But they both started on softs and both got ahead of Vitaly Bottas on his primes quite early on. And after that, it was Van der Garde who was the driver to beat of the newer teams. He had one of his best races in Formula 1. Great drive from Van der Garde, and he really is making a claim for staying in F1 and staying with Caterham for next season. It'll be interesting to see what happens to him. But yeah, Van der Garde again out racing that pick. And talking about being held up, let's go to Williams. And Vitaly Bottas, as I said, he was held up by those Caterhams in the first stint on the prime tyres. But the prime tyres, as they went along, they felt better for Bottas. And there was also traffic for Maldonado after his second stop, so he couldn't really put the hammer down, and that might perhaps even cost him a point in the end. Just 2.7 seconds by Adrian Sutil in the end for the second race in a row. Is about 2.7 seconds off of points. So very agonising for Williams, being so close to points. But the car did feel better for both drivers as this new aero package that they kind of got from the 2014 car. It's not a Coanda effect exhaust, but it seems to make the car handle better, especially at the rear. They can be a bit more forceful into the corners with it, and it seems to stick. And so yeah, a much better handling car for the two drivers, perhaps not getting the pace done though, as they're about the same where they were last race. Then the Toro Rossos, and disappointing for them. Ricciardo just dropped back at the start again, dropping back at the start. He's really got to look into that, especially as he's in a Red Bull next season, and dropping even a place or two could really affect his race next season, from getting even a podium to back up Vettel, or to just be stuck there in the top 5. So he's really got to improve those starts for next season, Ricciardo. It's been a problem for him ever since he's been in Formula 1, so he's really got to look at those. But yeah, they just didn't have the pace afterwards. And John Vergne, they switched to a one stopper after they noticed how well his car was doing pace-wise in the middle of the race, which was a bit interesting. But they just switched from soft to mediums too early on in the race to make it work, and as you saw, Vergne just dropped back near the end and had to let Ricciardo through in the end. So yeah, very disappointing for Toro Rosso. Let's go to Sauber, who are just ahead of them on track, and so disappointed for Sauber these last couple of races where they had this momentum of catching Force India, and now they're just falling back. And Hulkenberg, he just had lots of understeer in his first two stints, and then of course he had that penalty for the unsafe release into Perez's path, and yeah, it just did not work out for Hulkenberg to get any points this race. And for Gutierrez, the pace was definitely there, as he said, but again, the strategy might not have just worked out for him. He's battling with lots of cars as well, so always cost him time. And so yeah, just couldn't unlock the potential of that Sauber in the race. And once again, disappointing for Sauber this race. But it was brilliant for Force India, and they were both happy with their one stoppers to tilt from 17th on the grid up to 10th. Brilliant drive from the German. He's fighting for his place in Formula 1. Both of them are fighting for the place in Formula 1, but to get that 10th spot, great job by him, even if he did lose out the Perez on the last lap. That's because he's on his 27th lap on the soft tyres. That is brilliant stuff, making those tyres last till then. Just didn't have the traction out the corners to keep Perez behind, and the rest are so happy with his 6th spot, his best finish for quite a long time, even since his 4th place spot in Bahrain. So his 2nd best finish of the season from the rest. So no doubt he's happy, and he's really taken control of that 10th spot in the Drivers' Championship. So yeah, great race for the Force India drivers. Now let's go into the top 5 now, and let's start with McLaren. As I said, Perez, good race from him. He did struggle with the rear, with the first set of primes, with the rear tyre wear and traction out the corners, but after that, he kind of got stuck in traffic and it's tough to overtake, but he battled through and got 9th place in the end. So good race from Perez. Another good race following up his good race in India, and he's now got 35 points, just 4 points behind Hulkenberg in the Drivers' Championship in 12th. And so yeah, a good couple of races for Perez, and he's really fighting for his McLaren future with Kevin Magnussen seen as maybe getting that seat instead of him next season. So yeah, he's really fighting for his future, Perez, and he needs to do another couple of drivers like that in the last 2 races in America and Brazil. Button, was it first lap incident again? Just silly mistake into the first corner where it was quite a argy-bargy, as he said, and he just locked up the fronts and went into the back of the rest, then had to change his front ring on the second lap, and then he did quite a few laps on the softs, and then he went onto the primes for 44 laps on that last stint, and the car handled well for him. Just that first lap incident cost him points again, and yeah, very disappointing for Button, but he's in a very lonely 9th place in the championship, even though the rest is now just 12 points behind him in that championship. But yeah, lonely 9th place for him at the moment. Maybe after America he might be looking behind him in the championship. Ahead of them you had Mercedes, should we go with? Well, you had the Mercedes, Ferrari, Lotus and Red Bull, but yeah, let's go with Mercedes first. Rosberg in 3rd place, getting another podium, his 2nd on the trot, and keeping his point scoring run from Belgium until now, and he's just 7 points behind Webber, so there's a great battle for 5th in the championship, and Webber's only 9 points behind Hamilton, and Hamilton's just 8 points behind Raikkonen. So yeah, there's a great battle for even 3rd in the championship going on there in the Drivers' Championship. But yeah, very good race for Rosberg. You know, he could really push on those softs at the start, but then he had oversteer of the primes in the middle stint, which cost him 2nd to Webber, as you saw when he was stuck behind the rest, and Webber took advantage of that. On the other hand, Hamilton just struggled with grip and passing in traffic. If you saw Sky Sports, he just put too much ring on, it seemed. He didn't have the straight line speed to get past cars with the DRS, especially those Force Indians who were very stripped down, it seemed, and you know, had great straight line speed, perhaps the best of any team there. But you know, it's a struggle for Hamilton lately. He's been outperformed by Rosberg, and you know, 2 podiums in a row for Rosberg. Hamilton got 6th and 7th. He retired in Japan, of course. Rosberg got some solid points there, and then in Korea Hamilton did just better, and then in Singapore Rosberg did just better, and then you got Monza, and it was Rosberg ahead of Hamilton. And you know, it's been a great battle between the two this year. You know, I think they've been very even, and Rosberg's just 16 points behind Hamilton heading into these last 2 races. And you know, Hamilton is just in one of those funks, it seems, where everything's just working against him in the race. As I say, he got held up by Gutierrez early on, and he just didn't have the grip or the traction afterwards with the tyres. So yeah, it's just not working out for Hamilton in races at the moment. But we see in America, Austin Way, of course, he did a brilliant win last season in the McLaren against Vettel in the Red Bull. But yeah, let's see what happens to Hamilton next race. And then we got Ferrari and Massa. It was interesting. They actually based their strategy on a 1 stop, but then you know, the pace was too quick for the rear tyres. They knew that he was going to rear out, so they switched to a 2-stopper. And Massa was very disappointed that they went to the prime tyres, to the medium instead of the soft tyres, because he did quite a long stint on the softs the first time out in the first stint of the race, so he could maybe make them last till the end. But they went for the mediums, and yeah, there was about a 2nd gap between the tyres, and so yeah, that really did cost Massa, and he probably would have got past Vergne. He'd be right there with Hamilton in the end, and you never know, he probably would have got a top 5 in the end instead of Alonso. So you know, very disappointing for Massa, but he's been doing really well since he's been let go by Ferrari, strangely enough. He's, especially in qualifying, races haven't quite worked out for him, but he is showing that pace. He is putting himself in the shop window here, and that's why he's getting linked to teams such as Williams for next season. Just needs the sponsorship maybe, and that's a real sticking point for many drivers, of course, but for Massa as well. And so yeah, it'd be disappointing to see him go, I would think, next season, as he really is showing a bit of his worth now in Formula 1, now that he's a bit off the leash at Ferrari. But yeah, it was a good race for Massa. Just again, the strategy did not work out for him. Alonso was very happy with his race, getting 5th. You know, that's very disappointing actually. So he's very happy to get 5th, and he did get the fastest lap on those soft tyres. And no, 5th spot for Alonso is the best they could have managed, he said as well. And so yeah, that was a good 5th spot for Ferrari. Lotus, and we all know about Raikkonen, that first corner incident, and yeah, that was a very quick exit from the race and a quick exit of his season as well, as it's been confirmed that he's going to have back surgery to help just repair an old back injury he's had for over 10 years now, since a testing accident with Sauber, I believe. But yeah, he got re-aggravated at Singapore, of course, this year, and so yeah, he's now getting surgery to fix that, and be prepared for 2014 against Alonso in Ferrari. But for Grosjean, this race, 4th spot, just missing out on his 4th podium in a row, but he really is coming on strong in this last third of the season. And for Grosjean, they just lost time behind Force Indias at first, behind De Resta, who had better straight line speed to him, and then that middle stint really cost him a podium. And it's strange from those, because they always planned to do a 2-stop in this race, but they left him out there for a few laps there, where Webber and Rosberg could take advantage of their fresh tyres, put in the fast now, as I said, and really build a gap on him on those fresh tyres when Grosjean was right behind them when they pitted. So yeah, very strange choice there from Lotus. If they always knew they were going to do a 2-stop, they should have really pitted Grosjean immediately to respond. And you might have been really up there, really could have challenged Rosberg for that podium spot, maybe even Webber as well. But yeah, very disappointing to not get a podium for Lotus. But again, very good points for Grosjean, and he's really showing that he could maybe even be a team leader next year at Lotus. Depends who, of course, they put alongside him, and that's the big question still going forward in Formula 1. So we go to the big team, we go to Red Bull. Vettel just had an incredible car with pace and with the wear rates, and his 7th win in a row equals Schumacher record in a season, I believe, and Ascari as well. Not in the season, I think Ascari did over 52 and 53, but yeah, Vettel in the season equaling Schumacher as well from 2004, I believe, and he's actually in with a shot of getting Schumacher's 13 wins in the season as well, which he did in 2004, if I remember correctly. And so, what a season Vettel has had. What a season Red Bull have had since that summer break. All wins for Vettel. It hasn't quite worked out for Webber, but he's got a couple of poles and a few podiums as well. And so yeah, just a brilliant season for Vettel and Red Bull. They've just stormed the march again in the second half of the season, and they did say they might have compromised the 2014 development by pushing so hard on the 2013 development, making sure they're getting both titles. So that could be interesting next season, see if they've dropped behind at the beginning of the season. But just looking at the last few seasons in development, no one's going to beat them. And so yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens next season. But for this season, Vettel unbeatable again at Abu Dhabi, winning by over 30 seconds from his own teammate Webber. And Webber, he had a quite good race. He just fell behind Rosberg at the start and behind Vettel. That again, those starts have cost him again. How many points will he? If he had up all the points that he's lost from poor starts over the years, you could probably double his points haul. It's incredible how bad his starts have been. But he was sticking behind Rosberg, then his sauce went off in the early stints around lap 8 and 9, and then he got past Rosberg and he was happy with the rest of the race. And so yeah, it's just a shame that start really messed up Webber, because if he stayed ahead of Vettel and Rosberg, that could have been a very interesting race there at the front. But again, no, it was that finger that got away at the front, and it was Red Bull that got away as well. And talking about teams in the constructors, talking about drivers in the Drivers' Championship, in the constructors, Mercedes now 11 points ahead of Ferrari in that battle for second, and Lotus seem to have dropped back now, 37 points behind Mercedes, so they're not quite in that hunt for second place. It seems like they're in fourth. Force India have gained some points on McLaren, just 18 points behind McLaren for fifth now. So you talked about how Force India have been chased by Sauber just a couple of races ago. Now they're chasing McLaren again, so there's a good battle there for fifth, but it looks like they might have got sixth safe now, 32 points ahead of Sauber. Sauber would have to get top fives to really challenge for India for sixth now, and I don't see that happening. So yeah, Force India, the team to watch really in the last part, and Mercedes and Ferrari as well. But yeah, that is the winners and losers of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Quite obvious winners, quite obvious losers as well. But let's go to of the race now. So, of the race and driver of the race, there are quite a few candidates, right? It's seeming obvious. You got Vettel, of course. You got Webber as well, managed to get second out of Rosberg, who drew a very good race. Alonso in fifth in the Ferrari. Of course, the two Force India drivers were making that one-stopper work and both getting points for the team there. Perez fighting up to ninth spot as well. And Van der Garde for getting 18th for being the best of the newer teams as well. And so, actually, I'll just give it to Vettel. There you go. Vettel can have it. He was just sublime this race. And, you know, people do question whether it's the car, whether it's him, whether it's both in combination. But if, as you saw this race, it is both of them in combination. They're just unbeatable pairing, much like Schumacher and Ferrari before, Senna and McLaren, you know, Prost and McLaren as well in the mid-80s, and then you had Piquet and Brabham, and you know, all these pairings down the years, you know, that you just had into it. And probably the most apt comparison is maybe even Chapman and Clark with Newey and Vettel. But yeah, great drive from Vettel again, and really underlining why he is a four-time world champion. Team of the race, of course, you got Red Bull with a 1-2. Force India for getting those one-stoppers to work for both their cars in 6th and 10th, and maybe even Caterham for being best of the newer teams and closing the gap a bit to Toro Rosso and Williams in front of them. But I think I am going to be generous and share it between Force India and Red Bull. I'm mainly going to give it to Force India because while we expected them to maybe challenge for points, I'm not sure we expected them to get the one stop to work as well as it did, especially for the Resta. And, you know, getting that 6th spot is best result since Bahrain in the early part of the season. What a turnaround Force India have had in the last couple of races. They were really nowhere before around Japan, and now they just suddenly turned it round. You know, they've understood the tyres, they've got on top of that, much like Lotus have. And, you know, when we talked about the new tyres coming in, we thought Lotus, Force India might have lost the advantage there of being able to hold on to the tyres and, you know, really design their car around making one less stop than all the others. But look, it's now the end of the season, and they've now got back that advantage, it seems, Lotus and Force India. You know, it didn't quite work out for Lotus with Grosjean on this race, but it certainly did for Force India. And of course, Red Bull 1-2 in qualifying. How can I not have them as part of team of the race? They were just brilliant this race once again. Overtake of the race, and this is probably the hardest award to decide because I'm not sure many stood out, and they're mostly DRS affected, such as Hulkenberg going down the middle of 2 Toro Rossos and making that stick into turn 8, I remember. And of course you had Massa's overtake on Hamilton, and I'm probably going to give overtake of the race to that Massa move. Not because it was a DRS move, not because that DRS really helped him place the car, but because of how unexpected it was for Hamilton. It was just brilliant placing from Massa, great opportunism. I think I said that right, apologise if I did. Yeah, but just taking advantage of Hamilton being distracted by Sutil on the outside, you know, taking care of the Force India, and he just stuck his Ferrari down there in the middle, down the inside even, into turn 11, and you know, it kind of took Hamilton by surprise a bit, seeing that Ferrari down the inside. And yeah, that really did set up Massa for that middle stint with Alonso there running ahead of Hamilton. But yeah, I think I've got to give overtake the race to Massa for his kind of opportunistic move on Hamilton into turn 11, while Hamilton was defending, or trying to defend, Sutil around the outside in his Force India. So that is my review of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. I'll be back with a preview of the American Grand Prix at the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas, of course. And hopefully I'll have my review a bit sooner than that. But, you know, there's still painting going on. I've got to construct some furniture now, and hopefully I can do that right, so we have some room in the house. But yeah, hopefully I'll have that preview up around Wednesday next week. So hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. So till then, cheerio.